So this week we're going to make a rushlight holder, one of my favourite things to make. So we are starting with 5 inches of 25x6, separated into 2 sections, the top half 3 inches long and the bottom half 2 inches long. That's for the tripod, and we'll be splitting the 3-inch section in 2. And the rest of the rushlight holder will be made from 2 pieces of 10mm square, 4.5 inches long. So we'll start with the tripod, heat up the metal, give it a good scrub, and split the 3-inch half of the 25x6 into half with a nice sharp chisel. So use a piece of soft plate to protect your anvil and your chisel when you do the final part. Could have cut this with a disc cutter, but I find I lose a bit too much material with the disc cutter. So give it a straighten. And the next thing is to quench off the legs that you just split apart. Quench it down to the start of the split, and that will allow you to bend the legs out without actually scrolling them. And you'll notice I'm going right down into the crutch with the heel of the hammer. That's just upsetting the material on the outside of the bend. Looks a lot more elegant. It gives me a bit more material to form the tripod in that area. At that stage, give it a straighten. You will get some distortion from upsetting the crutch. And at that stage I'll dress out the swarf from the chisel split. Forge these 2 legs down to the section that I want. So normally scarf weld tripods, it's a lot quicker than splitting and forging out. But I wanted to make this something that somebody who doesn't have the equipment or the practice to forge weld could make quite easily. So next stage we'll pop over to the power hammer and draw out the 3rd leg. So again, you could do this by hand, the hand hammer and anvil. Like I said before, I've got a power hammer, so I'll use that. I do have a bit of an obsession with rushlight holders. I really enjoy making them. Love the shape of them. Could never afford a real one because they're quite expensive. So as you can see, I did that leg in a single heat. It's only roughly forged a section. As long as it's to the dimensions, I'm not really too bothered. Give everything a bit of a straighten. Make sure the legs are all at the correct angle, because there's a good chance that they won't be, especially if it's your first tripod. So it is noticeable if one of the legs is off. off by a few degrees. So the next thing I'll do is I will quench one of the legs and upset the crutch directly beneath it. And that just puts a nice pleasant radius on it, makes it look a lot smarter, a lot neater. Where you've done where you've done the chisel split, it'll be quite thin as well. So just going on the point of the bick, we'll just dress out that thin bit, which is the part that you can see being done now. That's the chisel split. So, and I'm doing it directly on the point of the bick. If you do it too far back, it'll just create a divot either side of the leg, which is pretty much impossible to get out. You have to forge the legs down to a thinner section at that stage. So that's roughed out. So mark off the centre of the tripod, and you can find that by drawing lines down the middle of all three legs, and where those lines meet is the centre. So at that stage I measure out, can't remember how much it was, I think it was 3 inches, 3.5 inches from the centre on each leg, and just cut each leg to size. Once that was done, it's just a case of forging it to a taper on the power hammer. Now I could have done a much fancier tripod than this. The main reason I didn't was time constraints. I've only got a limited amount of time to shoot these videos in a day, because I do have to do other stuff as well that actually pays money. The other reason is that this is quite a simple rushlight holder. It's not something that you'd find in a merchant's house or anything. It's pretty much a bog standard peasant, if you like, peasant rushlight holder. So I'm just going to do a little flick on the end for the foot, and there we go. So going over it with a flatter, which is actually a piece of half-round handrail with a handle welded to it. Very useful tool, the flatter. And once all that's done, I'll just dress the edges. Get nice straight lines, get rid of any hammer marks. And just make it look nice and smart. So with that part done, just round off the toes. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be smart. So there isn't really a place for geometric perfection in these things because they weren't made geometrically perfect back in the day. And they were kind of functional objects. And a lot of them were highly decorative, but most of them were just functional. So just mark off the centre again with a centre dot. Gonna punch a hole in that. So heat it up, lay it on the fire, rake some coals over the centre, which is the bit that you want hot. Leave the feet uncovered, the legs uncovered, because they're quite thin, they'll heat up quick, faster than the centre. Off we go with a punch. So as always, drive the punch straight through. Well, tap it to see where you're hitting first. Yeah, go for it. And then when you feel the anvil underneath, flip it over. Shear the slug. And over the pritchel. That was quite good, came out straight away. Perfect. So the last thing I'll do before shaping the legs, bending the legs to shape, is I will stick today's date on the underside of the leg. And that is purely because, as I said before, proper antique rushlight holders are very valuable. I don't want mine to end up in the fake antique markets. So I'll just stamp today's date on the underside, and that'll hopefully prevent anybody from fraudulently trying to sell it as an antique. So shouldn't be too bad with this one because it's mild steel and it's quite crisp. I do occasionally make mock antiques using a textured hammer, and I'll use wrought iron for them, and these will be indistinguishable from a real antique, so those ones in particular I will stamp a date on the inside of the leg to stop them being sold fraudulently as antiques. And stick my maker's mark on the outside of the leg. That won't prevent fraud, it's purely a vanity thing, and so that anybody can keep track of my work. So with that done, I will bend the legs, and you'll notice that I'm holding the centre of the tripod with the tongs to stop the punched hole from distorting. And I'm not hitting particularly hard, I'm literally just brushing the metal over the curves of the anvil quite gently. I don't want to put any hammer marks in it, I don't want to forge the material, I just want to bend it. So what will happen is that with the bick being the shape that it is, a cone shape, the leg will go off to one side. You'll just have to turn the tripod 90 degrees, eye it up, see which way it's bending, and tap it in the opposite direction. So it helps if you hold your work at 90 degrees from the curve of the anvil to start with. It's not always practical. So just flip it 90 degrees, tap it the direction it wants to go. Like so. And there we go, that's a tripod done. So next stage is the central pillar of the rushlight holder. So you're basically making the nibs like tongs. So I've marked off 3/4 of an inch from the end, and I'll set it down like I'm making a pair of tongs. It's exactly the same hinge plate, exactly the same system, but in miniature. Maybe 1/4 of the scale of a pair of tongs, something like that. So rushlights, there were many different styles of rushnips. I'm choosing a pointy style. This isn't a reproduction, it's purely coming out of my mind. I do reproductions. This one here, I'm just kind of formed a picture in my head and went with that. So make sure it's all straight. And what I'll do is I'll just knock off these corners. Looks a lot smarter. I could have forged it to a half circle, that would have looked quite nice as well. Would have been quite authentic. But for the purpose of this video I'm just going to knock the corners off. Dress it some more. That's that. And so next I will actually move to the other side of the anvil so that I can use the same straight edge, and that's the only straight edge on this anvil, so and I need the set downs to be quite crisp. It'll save me some filing later on. So I'm just setting that down and dressing it, and this is the hinge plate. straighten. So after that you will set down the end of the hinge plate. So quite heavy blows, don't be scared to hit the metal hard, it's not going to hit you back. The harder you hit, the faster you work. Nice hot work as well. So doing this is tapering towards the hinge plate with a wider base. It's a lot more stable and looks neater. You can't really do that under the power hammer because of the location of the hinge plate, which gets in the way of the dies of the power hammer. So stuck to doing this by hand. Won't take a particularly long time, just a bit longer than if I was using mechanical means. And I'm using my heavy wide-faced hammer, and that forges the metal a bit quicker and reduces hammer marks because of the wide face as well. So after that I will literally just straighten it, chase out any hammer marks with a smaller hammer, and finally knock off the sharp edges. Again, that looks smarter, looks neater, a bit more elegant, looks a bit more finished. So you're a blacksmith, not a machinist. Make it look blacksmithed. Within reason. You don't want it to look like it's come out of the bottom of a puddle. There we go, that's that. Quick scrub. Check for imperfections. And I've marked off the end at, I can't remember what it was, I think it was 3/16 or something like that. From the end, and I'll just literally bring it down to square, octagon, and the other one that everybody keeps sending me messages to tell me what it's called, the 16 face again. I'm not really making a massive effort to round it because if it's a bit rough it'll grip better in the punched hole. It's roughly 8mm round. So at this stage I had to stop for a bit. I had an emergency job for the canal that needed sorting out, but did that. 3 hours later I started on this again. So second half of the nibs, do exactly the same way for the hinge plate and the nibs itself. But instead of doing a taper pointing towards the hinge plate, forge the taper in the opposite direction. So for this I can use a power hammer. Just draw that out as long as you can, because we're going to scroll this, and it's going to be the counterweight that keeps the rush nips shut. So scrolls will just eat up material, and so as a consequence you want your taper to be as long as possible. I go over it with the flasher again, get it nice and smooth. Not much point in smoothing it by hand when you can do it mechanically. I'm doing it at a reasonably low heat because it planishes the material for me as well. And final stage before scrolling, just knock off those corners again. Doesn't that shot look beautiful? The lights in the background and everything, like Christmas. Even though it's April. Look at that. It's like a photograph in a country living magazine. So next step, start scrolling. So just go over the edge of the anvil. You'll see I'm not hitting it like a lunatic out of the asylum. I'm literally just brushing the metal to shape. So I could have really done with getting slightly longer heats on this because I ended up with a few sharp corners. Well, that's not a problem, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. But it would have been better if I'd started off with a longer heat. So start off by flicking the section over the edge of the anvil and then just turn it over and push it down. So brushing over, pushing back towards you, and then brushing down. Pushing towards you and brushing down. So keep it central as well. And the last bit. So if you did end up with a bit of unevenness or sharp bends rather than scrolling, you can just grab a pair of either needle nose pliers or scroll tongs or scroll pliers, and you can just pull or push the metal to where you need it. So it's not particularly difficult. You'd have to be quite delicate because you quite easily squash the whole thing. So there we go. So at this stage I'll just give the hinge plates a bit of a file, just to make sure that they marry up properly, they're going to work together properly, they're not going to interfere with each other. So any rounded edges, file those down to square. And mark off where you want your rivet to be. So pillar drill's currently dead. I'm using a hand drill. I detest hand drilling. It's difficult, it's inaccurate. But I did it anyway because I didn't have any choice. And bang the rivet through. Could maybe have done with slightly longer one, but still does the job. I'll rivet this up quite tight, just to make sure that both hinge plates are sitting flush together. So as you can see, it's nice and tight, not opening and closing, so I will get some heat in there and just wiggle it open, and that will allow any metal that is binding, which is what stops it from opening and closing, to wear down and release. At the same time I will slightly adjust the nibs just to make sure that they contact properly and that they're nice and aligned, and finish off wearing that hinge plate in. There we go, spot on. So the jaw has to drop shut the moment you let go of the monkey tail. So at this stage, heated up the tenon, and I will just drop the tripod on there, rotate it to where I want it, and start peening that tenon. Nice tight fit, but I didn't have to do any filing to it, which is a blessing. Filing tenons down is boring. Ideally I could have done with a gas torch for this. Would have made things a bit quicker, but still worked. adjust that a bit. So a lot of the time I will actually punch a square fixing hole in the middle of the tripod and make a square tenon. That just stops it from spinning round. If you do it nice and tight with a round tenon, it's not going anywhere anyway. Be careful not to hit the legs when you're when you're peening the tenon, because otherwise you'll knock them out of true. But offering up a square, you can see that everything went absolutely fine. Anybody would think I'd made a few of these. So next stage, give it a bit of a clean up with the wire brush. Don't do it the way I'm doing it, because it's dangerous. If that catches, it will go flying through the window or at me. If you do it the same way I'm doing it, just don't. Put it in a vise. I'm a trained professional and I sort of know what I'm doing. So, but as you can see, I'm keeping the wire brush quite central to the metalwork. And there we go, the rushlight holder. I will let you bask in the beauty of an 18th century lighting device. And my amazing photography. So there we go. Thanks for watching. Those of you who stayed to the end, hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe. I will see you on the next one. Bye.